Now that we have a way to listen to the user globally, we're going to head back into our auth service and create a method where the user can sign in and sign out. The easiest method to implement is anonymous login. You'll first want to make sure that anonymous login is enabled on the Firebase console. What it does is allow the user to log in without providing an email address or any other credentials. You can later upgrade their account to Google Auth or email password when they decide to fully register. The important thing is that it gives us a user ID that we can start using to model relational data in Firestore. In the code, we'll define a method called anonymous login and have it return a void future, which we can do by making it an async function. When logging the user in, it's generally a good idea to wrap your code in a try-catch block. This allows you to catch the Firebase auth exception, which can then be used to let the user know that something went wrong. Now, inside of try, to log the user in, all we have to do is call Firebase auth instance sign in anonymously. And that's all it takes to get the user logged in. We'll also want to give the user a way to sign out, so we'll create another async method for that, this time calling the sign out method on Firebase auth. That takes care of the code in our auth service. Now let's switch gears into the login page to build out the actual UI. Because this application will have 3 different sign-in methods, Google, Apple, and Anonymous, I'm creating a login button, which is just a dumb stateless widget that we can use to implement buttons for all 3 of those methods. When creating the login button, it will take 4 arguments, a color, icon, text, and login method function. We can pass named arguments into a custom widget by first declaring properties on the class. Then in the constructor, we can reference them using this, and also the required keyword if we want to make those properties required. Now we can go into the build method and start creating the UI. We'll start with a container to give the button a little bit of margin on the bottom. Then as its child, we'll make it an elevated icon button. This works just like other buttons in Flutter, except that it requires an icon argument, and will display it by default on the left side of the button. We can also customize the styling here using a different background based on the input provided to the widget. But most importantly, we're passing in a login method function, which will need to be called when this button is pressed. Now from here, we'll want to import Font Awesome Flutter for our icons and also the auth service that we built in the services directory. We already have a scaffold in this widget, so as the body, we'll go ahead and add a container and add a column as the child of that container. On the column, we can configure the cross-axis and main axis alignment to place the buttons in the middle of the screen. The children of this column will be the actual login buttons, but first I'm adding the Flutter logo just so we have something on top of them. You'd obviously want to replace that with your own logo. Below that, I'm adding a flexible widget, which gives us a little more control over how the items will work in the column. Its child is the login button, which takes the 4 arguments that we defined previously, like the icon, text, login method, and color. Now at this point, if we hot reload, we should have a login screen that looks like this, with the Flutter logo and the login button below it. Go ahead and click the button, and it should automatically navigate you to the topic screen. That's because we're listening to the user authentication stream that we set up in the previous video. But now we need a way for the user to sign out. So let's go ahead and add another button to the profile screen. Once again, we'll start with a scaffold. Then for the body, we simply have an elevated button with the text of sign out that when pressed, we'll call the auth service sign out method. But we'll also want to reset the navigation stack when the user logs out as well. And we can do that using the navigator and calling the push named and remove until the root route method. Go ahead and hot reload again, then navigate to the profile page as a signed in user. And when you click the sign out button, it should navigate you back to the login screen.